So welcome all. I'm Hannah Vickers. I'm the Chief Exec of the Association for Consultancy and Engineering. Apologies for the slight later start than we'd expected. We had a few technical problems, but I'm very glad to see we've got 75 of you in with us now, so that's great. As I said, this is the second in a series of webinars that we're doing aimed at supporting the entire industry. So whether you're my members, you're very welcome, but there will be people on this that are members of other trade associations, such as Brian's members from the F&B. You're all very welcome, and I hope that you'll find this a useful webinar. We do record these, so this will be available afterwards if you wanted to share it with some of your colleagues or anyone else you think might benefit from hearing what we're discussing today. Now, we are specifically talking about support for SMEs today, and we're also going to focus specifically on the job retention scheme and some of the schemes available to help you keep hold of your staff and with the government reimbursing some of their costs. So that's the focus. As I said, I've got two colleagues who are going to present. So I've got Brian Berry, who is the Chief Exec of the Federation of Master Builders, going to give us an overview of what it looks like from his members' perspective, the impacts that they're seeing, as well as some of the support that is currently available and what the FMB are asking for further to support their members. And then we have Joanna Lewis from Beale & Company, the law firm. So they've got a really deep understanding of the legal ramifications, and specifically today we're going to focus on employment law and the job retention scheme. So Joanna's going to give us a presentation on that. And then we're going to open up for questions, and I'm really pleased to say we've got Stuart Young from BEIS, who is on the panel with us today to help answer some of your questions. So it's really important that we're very honest and we utilise Stuart's expertise on the call, because he can perhaps ask us some things that we can't get from the guidance notes, and equally be able to help us if there are gaps in the guidance that's currently available. So you're all very welcome with my panelists as well. If I can just give a little bit of housekeeping. So those of you who may not have been on a webinar with us before, you'll see on the right-hand side of the pane, we've got a panel which should be able to allow you to ask questions. And you can ask questions at any point, and we will be using the last sort of half an hour or so of this webinar to answer those questions. So please do keep them coming in, and what we'll do is we'll collate them up while people are speaking, and then we'll come to the sort of Q&A at the end, and we'll go through those. So you don't have to wait till the end, you can type them in at any point, recognising we've got quite a lot of content to go through. So I think that's it from me. You should be able to hear us. We can't hear you, so don't worry about background noise, but please do keep those questions coming in so that you can type them in the panel on the right hand side. Okay, right, so on that basis I'm going to introduce our first guest. So Brian Berry is the Chief Exec of the Federation of Master Builders, is going to take us through a few slides on the impact of COVID-19, particularly on his members, the construction SMEs.
Furloughed, then can we make them redundant? Question.
Brian, are you there?
Hello, Hannah.
Hello, Brian. Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, very faint. Shall I start? I can't. You're very, very faint, but I can just carry on if you can hear me. Okay.
Yes, we can. Yeah. So please carry on.
Hello.
Hi, Brian. Yes, please make a start.
Okay, sorry. Yep. Okay. So, Hannah, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to your members. Just if anyone's not so clear, the Federation of Master Builders represents the small and micro companies in the building industry. We've got about 7,500 small companies all across the UK. And interestingly, we were founded in 1941, which is probably not a great time, a bit like it is today. It was the time of the London Blitz. And the London builders got together to form the federation because they weren't able to secure the contracts from the London council. So they banded together to form the federation, which is now the largest trade association in the UK. Now, obviously, we're facing a crisis which takes us right back to the 1940s, the biggest impact any of us will have experienced, particularly those working in the construction industry. And you can see some of the stats there about our industry. There are 300,000 companies in construction, and 99% of those will be SMEs, employing 250 or fewer people. The industry is worth £117 billion, or it was, and the importance of our industry, of course, is that it contributes about 7% of the UK's GDP. So we're a major sector in the British economy, and so the impact of the coronavirus obviously is to have a serious impact. And just early last week, we carried out a survey to find out what was the impact on our members. And you can see on the slide there that we've got some stats from our survey showing what the direct impact was. This was last week, so 75% of our respondents said that projects had been delayed or cancelled. So the impact was immediate for small businesses. And bearing in mind that our members are predominantly in the repair and maintenance sector, so householders, quite understandably, didn't want builders coming into their home. There was a 64% drop in inquiries. Obviously, people self-isolating, not looking to have building work done. And you can see also that 60% have already ceased, between 75 and 100% of their work. So the impact was absolutely immediate. And in terms of staffing and employment, you can see there that last week, 98% estimated that 25% or fewer of their staff could work from home. This is not a job you can do like the rest of us working from home. They're very dependent on getting out and going on site. And redundancies last week, 8% of our members were saying they were having to make redundancies. And we are going to repeat the survey again this week to see what the impact is. And I'm sure those figures have already increased. So then we get on to the point about actually what is the government doing to clarify and help the industry. Well, I think the big burning issue has been the lack of clarity about whether or not construction work can continue. And it's a discussion that we've been having within the Construction Leadership Council as well. The government's advice has been that construction work can continue, provided, of course, there is safe distancing of 2 meters apart. And the Construction Leadership Council has developed its own site operating procedures manual to try to help contractors comply with health and safety requirements. And again, that's very helpful. But the problem has been, I think, that as we've heard, that to actually work on a building site and keep 2 meters apart is quite a challenge. And it's something that actually, when the board of the Federation of Master Builders looked at it, they took a slightly different view. And so we have, our advice is actually that no work should take place unless it's absolutely essential or critical. So we fully accept that actually work will need to be done to keep the economy going, particularly supporting the NHS, the Excel, the creation of the Nightingale Hospital. All that needs to be done by the building industry. So we fully accept that. But I think our view has been, as a matter of public health, that actually construction sites, if it's non-essential, should not be operating. There's a slightly different view, I think, on the CLC, major contractors recognising they want to carry on, obviously complying with the health and safety. So I think there is that slight tension, and I think somehow governments maybe got caught in the middle of this, wondering what is the best approach to go for. Just thinking in terms of the support packages available to the SMEs, what we have seen, of course, is an unprecedented amount of state intervention to try to help the industry to carry on. And so far, we've seen a whole range of packages. You can see that we're providing a 3-month VAT holiday, and also the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme. Now, that has been welcomed by the industry, and particularly the FMB. But what we are finding is that many of our members are having problems actually when they go to the high street bank in terms of the interpretation of the scheme. We're not aware of any loans that have been secured yet by our members. We're keeping an eye on it. There has been some questions about the cost of the loans. So there are some questions there about actually how it's going to be implemented. And then in terms of employment, I think where there was obviously a huge government initiative was on the job retention scheme. So the giving help to workers, giving them 80% of their salaries if they were furloughed. Again, that's really positive, given that we've got a skills shortage in the building industry. It's critical that we try to retain as many of our workers in our industry. During the last recession, we lost about 400,000 people. And prior to that, in the 1990s, we lost 500,000. And the problem is we never really get the numbers back after we come out of a crisis. And I think if we need to try and keep as many people in the building industry as we can, this will certainly help. One of the problems, of course, is for small employers is they won't get the money instantly. So if there is a serious cash flow problem, that may present a problem about keeping staff on, and it may just be easier, unfortunately, to make them redundant at this stage. Coupled with the job retention scheme is the help for self-employed people, and that self-employment is a big component within the construction industry. You can see there 37% are self-employed, and on Friday the Chancellor announced his package, which was on the face of it seemingly very generous, trying to help the self-employed, bringing parity with the job retention scheme. But there are some issues there, I think, which you may have seen in the press over the weekend, about people falling between the nets. And one of the issues for our members is actually those contracting companies that have been set up, if they draw down a small salary themselves and then top it up with dividends, their income will be far, far less. And that's something that we've flagged up with the government. And I know the Construction Leadership Council is also asking for that to be looked at by the government. There's an estimated 2 million people who are not going to benefit directly by the scheme, and obviously that's a lot of people. So the government, I think, does need to work on refining the help for the self-employed. So what are we calling for to help the industry go forward? Well, one of the things that we would like to have seen, and we called for it straight away last week, was we noted that the government was providing grants for the leisure and hospitality sectors of up to £25,000. And that would have been extremely helpful, and still would be, for our members, the micro companies who are suffering cash flow problems. We did a survey last week asking our members what impact that might have, and 80% of our members said actually a £25,000 grant would enable them to keep going for between 2 and 4 months. And given that we want to keep building companies in business, we want to keep construction workers in our sector, that would be a huge boost and big help for the SME construction companies. There's also an issue about our small micro house builders. So our members typically build 5 or fewer new homes a year. And as you all know, there's a serious housing shortage in this country. And when we get out of this crisis, we'll need to try to sort of catch up with the amount of homes that we've lost being built during this period. Unfortunately, there is a lack of financial help for those building 5 or fewer. So we're looking to Homes England to look at that and adopt a more flexible approach in its support for the micro house builders. And as I mentioned earlier, we need to look at the financial help for those companies, those contractors who have a different means of drawing down salaries, particularly if they're taking a small salary and relying on the dividends to top up their income. So those are the main things. We're working with the CLC. There is a letter that's being drafted going to government with including those measures, and we think those would go a long way to help the SME sector going forward.
Pension.
In terms of what we're doing to support our members, I'm sure for all trade federations and membership bodies, members are looking to us to provide them with support. So we have created a dedicated web page with all the coronavirus information. Our members certainly are clamouring for daily information, bulletins, wanting updates in social media. We're using Facebook for our members. That seems to be a very popular means to update them about what's happening. There is some very poor understanding, I think, about even some of the schemes and what they mean. So we're having to correct a lot of that. And we are providing professional help through our business support helplines. We are producing guidance which will be tailored towards our members, and I'm very much aware that the Construction Leadership Council also producing guidance for the wider construction sector. And of course, giving builders a voice, particularly small builders, is really important, which is why we're working with our colleagues across the industry, lobbying the government and trying to flag up the importance of the construction sector to government, recognising that it will need to be strong and healthy if we're going to deliver the infrastructure that we need, and also get the economy moving when we come out of this crisis. And my earlier slide did mention actually any investment in construction is really productive. For every £1 invested, it generates £2.84 in the economy, and 92 pence of every pound stays in the British economy. So we are going to need a big boost when we get out of this crisis, and we need the people in our industry, and we need the government investment to kickstart it going forward. So let's hope the crisis isn't as long as we hope it's going to be, and actually there will be a speedy vaccination developed that will help us get out of this mess. So I think that was my last slide, and then I'm happy to take any questions.
Brilliant. No, thank you very much, Brian. And that was comprehensive and actually really great. I appreciate how busy you are at the moment trying to support your members, but fantastic to hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, about what is actually being felt with your members on the ground. I think that's, it makes it real rather than a lot of these sort of rolled up headlines. So just to remind everybody, if you want to ask Brian any questions, please type them into the panel at the right, and once Joanna has finished her talk, we will come to those questions. So please do keep typing them in, and I shall be coming back to Brian later on the call to answer some of those questions. So thank you very much for now, Brian, but please don't go away. So next, if we could move on to Joanna. So if we can move through to Joanna's slides, please. So Joanna's going to take us through in a bit more detail just the detail of the coronavirus job retention scheme. So some of the rules around what is in scope, what is out of scope. And then we'll come on to a process that we've adapted to taking a look at the how you actually implement this in a particularly in a firm where you might be looking at lower utilisation rather than wholesale work stopping. So I'll cover that a little bit later on, but I think probably best, Joanna, if you want to take us through the details, please. So I look forward to hearing it.
Thanks, Hannah. For those of you that don't know, I'm a partner at Beal & Co. We've got a long association with the ACE, and we're grateful for the opportunity to speak today and contribute to this programme of seminars and webinars to help us all tackle the COVID-19 crisis. I'm going to just look at, on my introduction slide, the job retention scheme, which the government's introduced to assist businesses to survive the pandemic. I'm going to look at an overview of the scheme, how the scheme is designed to work, which employees it will relate to, the process of making a claim, and a brief look at some of the other measures that might be important to your businesses, namely the business interruption loan, the reimbursement of statutory sick pay, and the time to pay scheme. If we could go to the next slide, please. So an overview of the scheme. The scheme is a temporary scheme. It's initially going to last 3 months. As Brian's already described, it's to help and support businesses to prevent the sorts of issues that you've seen in the last recession and perhaps in the 90s, where there was a considerable loss of jobs in the construction industry, and they haven't recovered. It took a long time to recover those things. So the goal really is to limit the number of job losses so that when the pandemic is over, the impact on the economy has been minimised for both businesses and employees, and to keep people in paid employment so that you can be up and running again without too much delay, which would be caused if there were significant job losses during the next year or so while the pandemic lasts. The scheme essentially will enable employers to furlough their employees, which means put them on a leave of absence, and that leave of absence has to be for a minimum of 3 weeks, and then receive a grant from the HMRC to cover the lower of 80% of their usual monthly wage, or £2,500 a month. The fees, commissions and bonuses that may be paid to your employees are not included under the definition of what the wage costs would be that you can receive the grant for. However, the government has confirmed that you will also be able to claim the associated employers' national insurance contributions and the minimum automatic enrolment employer pension contributions on that subsidised wage. They haven't yet issued their guidance on how you will calculate that, but that is due to come out before the scheme goes live. There isn't a compulsory requirement for employers to fund the remaining 20% or any amount above 2,500 of an employee's wage, but employers are free to top that up should they wish to do so. What is very key, though, is that furloughed employees will retain their employment rights, such as parental rights, statutory sick pay, unfair dismissal and redundancy payments, and will continue to accrue their holiday entitlement as well as their pension contributions during their period of furlough. In addition, the employee's subsidised wage will be subject to their usual income tax and other deductions. Also, it's important to note that payments received under the scheme will need to be included as income in businesses' calculations of their taxable profits for income tax and corporation tax purposes. So that's a sort of brief overview of the scheme. So next we'll look at how the scheme works. So the scheme is going to be run through the PAYE system, and so it's open to all UK employers that have created and started a PAYE payroll scheme on or before the 28th of February 2020. And that 28th of February 2020 is a key date for the purposes of this job retention scheme. In addition, you have to have a UK bank account. The scheme will also apply if a company is already under the management of an administrator. That administrator will be able to access the scheme as well. The way in which the scheme will work is that there's going to be an online portal created, and the scheme will be run such that you submit information to the HMRC through that portal about your furloughed employees and their earnings.
Can't hear you, Teresa.
Payments will initially be made for 3 months and will be available from the end of April, but can be backdated to the 1st of March. And the government have said that they will consider extending the scheme for more than the 3 months if it's necessary to do so. So looking at the next slide, which is about which employees fall under the job retention scheme. So essentially all furloughed employees who have been on your payroll before or as at the 28th of February 2020 on any type of contract. So this will cover your full-time and part-time employees that have been furloughed, your employees on agency contracts, employees on flexible or zero-hour contracts who are not working, and also employees who were made redundant since the 28th of February 2020 if they are rehired and then furloughed. However, it is important to note that employees that have been hired since the 28th of February cannot be furloughed or claimed for under the scheme. What is very key and is stressed throughout the scheme is that in order to be eligible to claim the wages of a furloughed employee, that employee cannot undertake any work or do anything that would generate income for on behalf of your business. So who is not covered? Employees on unpaid leave who are on unpaid leave prior to the 28th of February 2020 are not covered. Employees who are receiving statutory sick pay during the period at which they receive that statutory sick pay do not look like they are covered, but once they are fit to return to work, then they could be furloughed and would then be eligible. Employees who are working but have had their hours reduced or their pay reduced are not covered by the scheme. And employees on any sort of statutory leave, so maternity, contractual adoption, shared parental, all those sorts of leaves, because they qualify for statutory pay during those leaves, they wouldn't receive this pay. But it's unclear, but it does look like if your company pays enhanced contractual pay during those periods of leave, then that may be an eligible thing to claim through the scheme. And much like with sick pay, once their period of leave has finished, you can then furlough them. So, for example, if you're on maternity leave for the 6-week statutory pay, you could then be furloughed at the end of that during the remainder of your entitlement to leave when you're not entitled to pay. So, looking at the next slide, I'm just going to go through the process of making a claim. So in order to make a claim, the first thing that has to happen is you have to calculate the relevant wage costs. So you start with the basic salary because bonuses and commissions and those sorts of top-ups to salaries are not included. So it's starting with a very basic salary. For a full and part-time employee, you look at the actual salary before tax as at the 28th of February 2020. For employees where pay varies, if that employee has been employed for a full 12 months prior to the claim, then you look at the higher of the same month's earning from the previous year. So for example, if you're claiming in April 2020, you would look at April 2019, or average monthly earnings from the 2019-2020 tax year. If the employee has been employed for less than a year, then you look at the average monthly earnings since they started work. National insurance and the minimum employer pension contributions are then claimed in addition on the above calculation. Any national insurance contribution on a top-up that you may decide to pay, so if you decide to top up the remaining 20% of the salary, are not covered by the scheme. And also if you're an employer that puts in more than the 3% minimum pension contribution, that's also not covered by the scheme. It's important to note that you should keep a careful calculation, a record of the calculation that you do, because the HMRC are retaining the right to go back and retrospectively audit all aspects of your claim. So we would advise that you do keep a careful note of the calculations for each of your claims. In order to make a claim, you'll need to provide to the portal your PAYE reference, your contact details, your bank details, the number of employees being furloughed, the claim period and the amount claimed. And they have said that only one claim can be made at least every 3 weeks, but they can be backdated to the 1st of March 2020. So that's a very quick run through of the scheme and the process for making the scheme. So I just wanted to just give you a few very high-level points to consider about the scheme. First of all, I think it's important that there is a protocol for furloughing your employees put in place by your business. And the key thing to really consider is your employees' contractual terms. Do you need your employees' consent to furlough them? Given that you're going to be paying them less than their normal pay, then consent would be required. It's not entirely clear if you would need consent if you're proposing to keep them on full pay whilst claiming the grant for the 80%, but our advice would be that you seek consent in any event. You need to look at what your employee's contract says about a reduction in pay. a reduction in pay can amount to an unlawful deduction unless there's prior written consent or contractual agreement. So again, we would advise that every agreement is recorded in writing, and the government advice actually does say that it needs to be recorded in writing so that you're eligible for the scheme. It doesn't say you have to provide copies of that written agreement, but it does say that you need it in writing in order to be eligible. And at Beal & Co, one of my corporate partners, Michael Archer, has produced a template for a variation to an employee's contract, which could be filled in for your particular employee's circumstances to assist with how to vary an employee's contract to put them onto furlough. You need to give very careful consideration to who you're going to furlough and for how long they are going to be furloughed for. Obviously, it's a very fluid situation at the moment. People's work capacities are changing as sites shut down or as projects get put on hold. So trying to judge the capacity and how long someone should be furloughed for will need very careful consideration, bearing in mind that in order to be eligible, you have to be furloughed for a minimum of 3 weeks. So you might want to think about whether you need to consider reserving the right to call somebody back from furlough during their time of furlough, if you were to try and furlough them for the next 3 months or 6 months, and whether or not you can reserve the right to furlough them again if you bring them back, but actually the capacity is not there as anticipated. So thinking about your capacity situations and how they translate into any agreement that you have with your employees will be key. Our advice for the easiest way to go about doing this furloughing is to seek volunteers, because it's very important that you have a fair selection process. The needs for risks of unfair dismissal and discrimination claims will be prevalent in this decision as to who to furlough. And in addition, your people management as well, because some employees may feel very uncomfortable at being furloughed. Other employees may welcome being furloughed, but if they're somebody who you as an employer don't want to furlough, then that could cause some difficulties. And so people management is key to this. And then we need to look at what would happen at the end of any furlough period, which is on the next slide. So thinking towards the end of this crisis, will you want to retain people who have been furloughed, or will you want to make them redundant? You may recall that when the scheme was first announced by the Chancellor, employees who were going to be furloughed, it looked like it had to be somebody who would otherwise be made redundant. Now that requirement does seem to have disappeared from the government advice that's been published. So it's not necessarily a case of it's either redundancy or furlough, but equally, it may be that when you come to the end of the period of furloughing, redundancy is an option. And so you will need to bear in mind that a furloughed employee has all their full employment rights. And so any process of making a decision as to whether they're retained or redundant must follow the normal rules under employment law. And you need to set out your decision-making process clearly and transparently to avoid any unfair dismissal or discriminatory claims that may come from a decision to make somebody redundant at the end of the furlough period. Also, you need to think about what training they may need when they come back from a period of furlough, whether you can do that training during the period of furlough. It is possible, the government has said, that training can be done whilst an employee is furloughed, as long as they are paid the national minimum wage. And I think the reason that they say that is because if an employee is put on 80% of their normal salary, that could bring them below the national minimum wage. But nonetheless, in terms of just your resourcing and what you need to think about, it may be appropriate that you do your reintroduction training during the end of their period of furlough. Likewise, with holiday entitlement, it seems that employees who are furloughed will still retain their holiday entitlement. And what you don't want to do is plan for employees to come back from furlough for them to take all their racked up holiday leave. So you might want to see if you can negotiate with your employees that there's a period of holiday leave built into the beginning or end of their furlough, so that you can plan your resourcing effectively for the end of the furlough period. And then the last two sort of points to consider that come out of the guidance that's been issued so far is your management of your claims to the HMRC and your cash flow issues. I think Brian already touched on the fact that you won't get reimbursement straight away. There's going to be a period of time, and so you will need to think about your cash flow issues. And also, they haven't made it clear how long the scheme will stay open for you to apply for your reimbursements at the end of the scheme. And so you need to keep on top of the process during the scheme so that you're not caught out at the end. And finally, you just need to make sure you do keep a clear trail of how your wage costs have been calculated in case you get audited retrospectively. So I know I've gone on a bit longer than I should do, so I think we're going to turn to questions. But if there was anything that anybody wanted to talk about the other measures, then just either ask a question or drop me an email afterwards. My contact details are at the end of the page. And we have got some other information that we're running, which may be of helpful, and the links are on the end of the slide as well. Thanks, Hannah. Sorry for running over slightly.
That's okay. I think, no, it's a big topic. So no, that's brilliant. Thank you. Right, I think we've got one more slide. So this is, if we could just go to this, this is the when you should furlough staff. Now, I will say that this is currently draft. What we're seeking through the Construction Leadership Council is that this gets ratified effectively by BEIS as a process that could be applied specifically in our sector, and because it's an interpretation of the rules effectively. So we're waiting on that, and once that has been approved, we will issue it. But I just thought it was worth using as a prompt very quickly in this webinar, because I think it is quite helpful in that decision-making process around when to furlough or who to put into a furlough position. So I'll just talk you through it very, very briefly, and we'll move then to questions. So we've got a couple of situations where you could consider furloughing your employees on the left here. So either you can't access site to work safely, as Brian alluded to with some of the CLC guidance on sort of safe operating procedures, or it's very sort of clear cut that perhaps you've got canteen staff in an office that's closed, or you've got a receptionist in an office that's closed, people who can't do their day job. So straight away you could say those people are eligible for furloughing, so you need to consider furloughing those. If then perhaps for the balance of your workers, looking now to whether or not you've actually got a shortfall in your workload. So perhaps you've got 100 engineers but you've only got work for 80. If that's the case, then you move into identifying the number. So I just gave you there, I've got 100 engineers, but I've only got work for 80. Fair enough. In that case, then potentially in a normal circumstance, 20 of those engineers would be at risk of redundancy. So therefore, there's 20 positions that we could put up for furlough. Moving into the next box, you're looking at whether or not you undertake critical work. Now, this is something that is quite specific to our sector. But we do need to have a really serious think about it, and I'm sure as responsible businesses you would be thinking about this. But some of these critical work functions, so for example, if you are a contractor working on the sort of lighting and safety, sort of safe building operating systems in a hospital, for example, those are the sorts of things that would be classed as critical work functions. Now there is a list of that is published, so you can cross-check, but you will know whether or not your work is critical. Again, on that basis, you can look at whether or not, so if you are undertaking critical work, you have to be quite careful with furloughing, in that you need to make sure that you are retaining that capacity to undertake a sort of emergency response function. So you can see there at the top, you've got the opportunity to, it doesn't mean you can't furlough staff, but when you're making the decision about the number of positions to be furloughed, you need to make sure that you've kept a ring fence of the sort of minimum level of minimum capacity required to operate some of those critical work functions. And what we're looking for, and we don't have it yet, but what we're looking for is to have some clarification around how you might cycle people in and out of furloughs. So we know that it's a 3-week block when you furlough somebody, so potentially you could manage capacity with your back to your sort of work for 80 engineers by cycling those 20 that have been put on furlough into and out of the business, so it doesn't fall to 20 who don't work at all versus 80 who have to do all of the work. You could look at perhaps on a 3-week rota, rotating them in, so 3 weeks and people swap into the furlough group or back into the main the sort of main working part of the business. So that's a way to get around some of those capacity challenges. We're just waiting for endorsement of that. And then the second angle at the bottom there, you'll see if you don't undertake any critical work, you can be a little bit less structured because you can sort of start to base it on, clearly on the capacity that you need, but just being a little bit more open around this kind of voluntary furloughing, recognizing that you do need to, to perhaps secure agreement from employees to be furloughed. You can offer that as a voluntary position. So I'm going to pause there because we have got a lot of questions. So I think we'll go back to our panelists now. So Brian and Joe, if you can be, and Stuart from BEIS, if you can be ready, I'll just start firing questions. And if we can keep our answers concise, we'll try and get through as many as we possibly can. And we may go a few minutes over, recognizing we were a few minutes late in starting. So first question for you, Joe. It's from a company that's got a young graduate that started on the 9th of March, which is after the 28th of February furlough date. Now, they joined from another engineering practice, but they weren't made redundant there. So they've gone from 2 roles where they weren't at risk of redundancy. They've started with the current employer on the 9th of March. Are they able to furlough this person?
Hi, Hannah. On the current guidance, it doesn't look like they are, no, because you have to have been on the payroll of your employer from the 28th of February before or on the 28th of February 2020. If they have any other employment though, then they could be furloughed from that employment, because you could be furloughed from more than one employer if necessary, but you have to have been on the payroll as at the 28th of February 2020.
Okay, fine, that's clear, thank you. A second one to you, if we furlough employees, can we then move to make them redundant at the end of the furlough period?
Yes, you can, but you just have to bear in mind that you have to follow the normal rules about redundancy. And if you're looking to make, for example, if you're looking to make more than 20 people redundant, then you need to make sure that you comply with all the notification requirements of a collective redundancy process. So yes, you can, but you just need to bear in mind that you need to follow the normal redundancy protocols.
Okay, brilliant. Right, another one for you, Joe, and then I've got one for you, Brian, after that. Can the employee who's been furloughed volunteer to work with the NHS as part of one of their voluntary schemes whilst they are on furlough?
Yes, they can. That's been specifically carved out. So volunteering doesn't count as employment work. I mean, there is still you have to be careful that you're not volunteering under the name of the business, so because you cannot be seen to be generating income. So an employer can't sort of put you in your t-shirts branded by your own business to do it. But yes, you can definitely volunteer for the NHS. You just have to be careful that you're not seen to be generating any sort of income for your employer. But volunteering has been specifically carved out, and that's not just for the NHS. That could be for any sort of charity volunteering work.
Mm-hmm. And I'm right to understanding that it's also training as well. I know you mentioned that a little bit, but I thought that was a really interesting point. So I'm thinking if people have got graduates who are on training schemes, actually they can continue with their training, all of their professional qualifications.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think, particularly for your members, your CPD training can be kept up and caught up on even if you're on a period of furlough. So
it might be an incentive to somebody to volunteer then, get your chartership done.
Yeah, just subject to that caveat that if furloughing them and their wage is reduced below the national minimum wage, then you do have to top up to make sure they get to the national minimum wage level.
Okay, no, brilliant, thank you. We're doing well at these quick fire questions. Right, so one to you, Brian. What is the position for self-employed contractors who are registered under CIS?
So what is the position for them?
Yeah, what is the position? What support would they be able to access if they're working under the CIS scheme?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would need to look into that into a bit more detail. I don't think there is that they do need more support on that, actually. I think that was excluded, but I need to check, to be honest.
Yeah, I know you were looking into this, aren't you? Because we've relatively recently had the self-employed guidance, so we're still unpicking. But no, I think that's, yes. Okay, so that's one we can come back to.
Yep.
Stuart, a question for BEIS. How do we reconcile the difference in the UK government and devolved government's advice in relation to working on a building site?
So we are currently having discussions with the Scottish Government. There will be some more material coming out, but we're just trying to reconcile at the moment. The basic answer is there are political differences at play here. So the guidance that does come out is not going to be exact between the UK, so between the English and the Scottish Government.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Stuart. No, that's helpful. And all of it as well is on the BEIS website, isn't it? So everything, I know you've got sections on there for the different advice being issued by the devolved government, so you can go and have a look on the one page and get, depending on where you're working, specific advice. Is that right?
Yes, that is, yeah. Yeah,
brilliant. Okay, no, good to know. Right, we've got a question on the business interruption loans. I think this is somebody who's looking for some support, and in particular, they're trying to work out which lenders are not requiring directors to offer personal guarantees on the loan. And obviously, we don't recommend any specific lenders, but the ones I've heard, and Stuart, this would be worth your comment on, but the ones I've heard that aren't are NatWest and the Royal Bank of Scotland, but that's just from member feedback. I don't know if you have a wider view, Stuart, or whether the government's actually requiring none of them to do that now, because I know that's been changing, hasn't it?
It's been changing, and I don't think there's a fix. I don't think there's a fix unless Joanna knows. I don't think there's a fixed position on that yet.
So I don't think there is, other than the government website says that the big four banks have agreed not to take personal guarantees as security for loans below 250,000. It doesn't specify who the big four banks are, but the big four banks being the two that Hannah just mentioned.
Okay.
And probably HSBC.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I haven't got anything else.
No, that's helpful. Okay, so we think the big four are, but that's been a very recent development in the last 24 hours, and certainly from other things that have been put out, we know sometimes it takes a little while to make it down to the branches themselves. So do keep feedback coming back to us on that there. I think both myself and Brian would be quite interested for members who were having those sorts of difficulties or being asked for personal guarantees, because we can then escalate it through Stuart into BEIS.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Right, so we've got a question about business that's applied for a small business grant. It's been confirmed that the council, and this is Southwark Council, so the local authority has received it, but they've not had any feedback yet. I don't know, Stuart, whether we've got any thoughts or feedback on how long some of these might take to process, or whether you've got any anecdotal evidence on how quickly, but I can imagine they're probably quite inundated, aren't they?
They've been inundated. It's not our team specifically, there's a team within BEIS and obviously MHCLG as well. So if you can send me, Hannah, the details separately offline, I can look into that.
Brilliant. Okay, so yeah, if there's any delays, please send them through to myself or to Brian, whoever you're a member of. If you send them through, and we can, as we say, pass them into BEIS to see if they could be accelerated. Okay, so we've got a question for you, Joe, about furloughed staff accessing company software as part of their training. So such training would be personal benefits and would not generate an income for the business. Is that allowed? Even if it's on company software, so to speak?
It's a good question, to which there's no specific guidance on the question, but given that training is specifically carved out, I think that would be allowable, but I'd need to do a bit more digging into that. It does say training for your job is carved out, and certainly in respect of job requirements where ongoing specific training is a necessary part of the job, then it would be difficult to see that the software wouldn't be accessible. The requirement is not to generate income for the firm, so using the firm's equipment For example, would it go as far as if you're issued with a work phone or you have a work car, can you not use that? It is not set out in the guidance at the moment. It's more the other way around, that whatever you do can't generate income or it mustn't be work for the company.
No, okay, no, that's fair enough, and I think and we're unlikely probably to get much more clarification than what we've got. So I think it is that how have you reconciled with it's not generating income for the company? I think as long as you've got an answer to that and you've recorded that if you were audited, is probably as far as we're going to get in terms of the amount of guidance, I'd suggest.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Okay. Right. So we've got two questions in one. Someone's been a bit cheeky here, Jay. This is for you. So can you turn on and off the furloughed staff? So this was back to the point I raised about maybe having a sort of rolling 3 week on, 3 week off furloughed status. I don't think there's anything specific in the guidance about that, which is why we're seeking the clarification from BEIS. But have you got anything, a different view?
Well, I think that when I was talking about resourcing and who you may furlough, I touched on this in as much as any period of furlough has to be a minimum of 3 weeks, but we would recommend that in negotiating with your employee, the variation to allow them to be furloughed, you might want to consider reserving the right to either recall a furloughed employee if you've got the capacity, as long as they've done the 3 weeks, and also to be able to furlough them again. So on that basis, there's nothing that I can put my hands on to say you couldn't do a sort of rolling program of furloughing, as long as you understand that if they're not furloughed for a minimum of 3 weeks, you won't be able to claim the grant. But there's nothing that strictly says you can't furlough someone and then bring them back and then furlough them again if you needed to.
Okay. Brilliant. No, that's really helpful. Thank you. Right, I know we're going to get through all questions. I'm going to carry on for another 5 minutes, but if people have to leave, then that's absolutely fine. Just recognising we were slightly late starting. There's a question: can we provide a worked example of how you calculate the salary to be reimbursed? I think we can do that, Jay, can't we? We can put that into our sort of follow-up email and guidance on here.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it depends on whether your employee, how long your employee's been employed for, as to how you go about working it out. But they've set it out, so we should be able to come up with a sort of example for a full-time employee versus an employee whose pay varies.
Yes. Okay. No, I think that would be really helpful. Right. So question to you, Joe, and to you, Brian. So this is somebody who is running a site with a directly employed site manager, so presumably on PAYE. Should all the subcontractors on site decide not to come to work, but technically the building site are still able to open, can the site manager be furloughed as he has no site operation to manage? So I don't know, Brian, if you want to say, I know that you've got a particular position from the FMB on sites opening.
Yeah, we're taking quite a strong line on this. That actually, we've said that only emergency and critical work should take place. I mean, we're not a regulatory body, so our members take that advice, but that is our standard advice. That makes sense. Some problems, contractual arrangements in a supply chain. I appreciate that. So that would be a difficult judgment call.
Okay, no, that's fair enough. And Joe, I mean, in terms of that, if it looks like, I mean, clearly in that situation, if they haven't got a site that is operating, it's not generating income, and therefore they would be eligible to be furloughed. Is that the right interpretation?
Well, I think, I mean, originally, as I said, when the Chancellor announced it, it was a choice of, are they likely to be laid off if not? But that seems to have gone. So I think, yes, I mean, you could furlough them. Again, it comes down to what the terms of their contracts say as to whether that could be ordered or whether you would need consent. And our recommendation is firmly that everything is done by consent, and that consensual agreement is recorded in writing. But there's no reason why you couldn't furlough them, I don't think.
Okay, brilliant. Right. I think that's all we're going to get through in terms of questions. We have got a few others, but what we'll do is we'll include any that are relevant to the furloughing scheme specifically in the guidance that we'll issue later on today. That is going to be sort of Construction Leadership Council guidance. So BEIS will be working with us on that and distributing that. And then obviously if you've got things, we don't have all the answers, but if you've got things that you want to feedback either to myself or to Brian, as members of ours, then please do, because we have got this really good relationship through Stuart and through the BEIS team into central government, where there are specific issues that you want to escalate to us or specific bits of feedback. So we've had some discussion on the banks and the loans, and that sort of feedback is really valuable. So I think I speak for myself and Brian and say please do keep it coming to us. So I think that's it. So thank you very much to my panelists. Apologies, we had a few technical problems to start with. There are more of these. We've got a very popular one. It's proving on Thursday this week on procurement, public sector procurement, and how some of the government support works through that. So there are some interesting things there. But yes, please do keep your feedback coming in. And again, just want to say thank you very much to my panelists, because this has been a fantastic industry effort. And what you're seeing here is a little bit of a glimpse into how much we're collaborating across the industry with the experts and into BEIS. So thank you very much, everybody who was on the panel. I do appreciate you taking the time. Take care all.